This morning on BRN, 48% of credit card holders carry debt month to month. Joining me now is Ted Rossman of Bankrate. Ted, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Yep, always great to talk to you. And we're going to talk about credit card debt. Bankrate just came out, with a new survey. How are we doing? How are Americans doing? How are credit card holders doing managing their debt? We just came out of the holiday season.
A little bit better than last year, but still room for improvement. I mean, not to shame people. Often when you have credit card debt, it's a practical cause, like a medical bill, a car repair, day-to-day expenses. Those are overwhelmingly the biggest reasons. But here's where we're at. Basically, half of cardholders carry debt from month to month, 48%, so slightly less than half. And about half of them, 53%, have had that debt for at least a year. Now, that's actually down from 60% a year ago, but that's still a lot of people carrying a lot of debt for a long time. In total, Americans have a record $1.2 trillion in credit card debt. The average interest rate is still around 20%. It has not declined all that much. It peaked last summer at 20.79, so it's fallen about three-quarters of a point since then, but still a very high debt burden, unfortunately.
It is unfortunate, and I raised my hand because I think I'm one of those people, unfortunately, that's carrying a debt, although it's a no interest period. So I guess I have a little bit more time to kind of work that out. But Ted, is this directly correlated with inflation? And I want to ask you that because, look, we've just gone through a very difficult time for many Americans, myself included, you and your family included. Food prices, gasoline, other goods, very expensive. So because of that expense, are people taking on more credit card debt? And would we expect potentially, as that inflation cools, maybe to see the credit card debt go down as well?
Inflation and high interest rates, which have fought inflation but also presented problems of their own, those factors have combined to really push balances a lot higher in recent years. In fact, since the beginning of 2021, credit card balances are up 51%, according to the New York Fed, which has been a pretty shocking rise. Now, to be fair, they'd actually fallen a bit in the year prior to that. So that was all the pandemic stimulus at work. From Q4 2019 to Q1 of 21, balances actually fell 17%. And then since then, they're up 51. The rate of change has started to slow recently as inflation has come down and wage growth has started to catch up. We're not all the way back. Wages have gone up 17% over the past few years, and inflation has been a cumulative 20% since early 2021. So we're still a little bit upside down there. It's really the ultimate all news is local kind of issue. It's why people say credit cards are like power tools. They're either really useful or dangerous depending on how you use them. It really does shake out to be roughly half and half. For every person who's paying in full, avoiding interest, taking full advantage of rewards, there's someone else who is stuck with a very expensive credit card balance, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Ted, when you look at the data, let's talk about generations for a second. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm the son of baby boomers. How are we doing relative to, I guess I'm less concerned about my generation. How about younger generations? Are they doing better? Have they learned the lessons of their parents and grandparents?
Perhaps not, unfortunately. TransUnion did a recent study that I thought was really interesting that showed that Gen Zers actually have considerably more credit card debt than millennials did at the same age. Millennials were actually kind of slow to jump on board with credit. The theory is that a lot of millennials came of age around anywhere between the dot-com bust and the Great Recession. And millennials were kind of fearful of debt at first. Gen Zers have not had quite the same debt aversion. Now, to be fair, they've also had a lot of other expenses. I mean, college costs have continued to go up, up, and up. Housing. In terms of sheer dollars owed and also the percentage of credit card debtors, it's actually Gen Xers who are faring the worst. Some of that, though, is that they have higher credit limits and they've had more time for this debt to build up. Gen Zers are showing some warning signs in that they have a pretty hefty amount of debt at a young age, and the fear is that that may continue to grow as their expenses grow and as credit limits grow, because that's another thing. People with higher incomes actually have more long-term credit card debt than people with lower incomes, which is kind of surprising. But some of it you might say keeping up with the Joneses, you might point to higher credit limits. The prevalence of credit card debt is higher among lower income households, but the prevalence of long-term debt actually rises with income, which is kind of odd.
Ted, how do we let's talk about a remedy or strategy, because I don't, obviously we can't get in each individual circumstance, but how do we, $1.2 trillion of debt, that's a lot. How do we work to pay that off? It's a new year, financial resolutions, weight loss resolutions, being a good person resolutions. How do we work to get that debt down and in control?
My favorite tip is to sign up for a 0% balance transfer credit card. You could take your existing high cost debt, move it over to a new card like the Wells Fargo Reflect or the Citi Simplicity that won't charge interest for up to 21 months. That's huge. I mean, you think about the average credit card balance, which is roughly $6,400 according to TransUnion. That sounds like a lot. Well, if you divide that into 21 equal monthly installments, you're talking about $300 a month or so. That starts to feel a lot more attainable. And avoiding interest for that long is a really powerful tailwind. So, especially if you have good credit, I would say go for the 0% balance transfer. If you have a lower credit score, or maybe you have a lot of debt, like more than five or $6,000 in credit card debt, that's when I would say go to a reputable nonprofit credit counselor. A group like Money Management International can walk you through the process, get you into a plan with a 7 or 8% rate over 4 or 5 years. That can be really beneficial.
Ted, a lot of talk, now talking macro a little bit. The Federal Reserve, I think, cut rates. That was last year in 2024. Does that directly correlate, or how does that find its way into the credit card interest rate? I know there's not a one-for-one relationship, but does it find its way? And could we see credit card rates decline if the Fed continues to cut its federal funds rate?
Fed rate cuts do pass through to credit card holders. The problem is that credit card rates are starting from such an elevated
Yeah,
position that
fine.
like,
Yeah.
the best guess this year is that the Fed may cut by half a point. Maybe it's a little more, maybe it's a little less, but when it comes to credit cards, the current average is about 20%. So, I mean, honestly, even if that fell 3 or 4 points, which is not going to happen this year, but even if it did, that would still be high cost debt. So, that was really what we saw last year that, the Fed did implement a full point of cuts. The average credit card rate fell about 3/4 of a point, and yet it's still over 20%. So that's where you need to take matters into your own hands. Pay it all if you can. I know that's easier said than done, but shy of that, get the 0% balance transfer card, work with the reputable nonprofit credit counselor, take on a side hustle, cut your expenses. There are different levers that you can pull.
Yeah, and lastly, Ted, I mean, we've got a new Congress, a new administration. The politics make strange bedfellows. I believe incoming President-elect Trump and Bernie Sanders are aligned around these interest rate and fees charge. I mean, could we see something? I know you're not a political analyst or a policy analyst, but could we see some changes there that might have an impact on our credit cards and the fees we pay?
Yeah, how about that? It's really strange to find Trump and Sanders agreeing on anything. But yeah,
On
on
any
credit card rates, they are pretty aligned. Trump actually called for a temporary 10% credit card rate cap on the campaign trail. Sanders previously proposed 15%. So, that right there is kind of shocking. Trump is further
Not far
left.
off.
Yeah, I know. Now, honestly, I don't think either will come to fruition. There is starting to be some bipartisan agreement on credit card rates and fees. And, we also have a lot percolating when it comes to interchange fees that merchants pay the card companies. There is sort of a growing populist wave among both Republicans and Democrats, but a hard cap seems very unlikely. Republican Senator Josh Hawley proposed an 18% cap. None of these have really gone anywhere. There actually could be unintended consequences too, as far as reduced access to credit and reduced rewards. And I don't see a hard cap coming into play, but it is interesting that the conversations are happening. And this is getting a lot of widespread awareness that the average credit card charges 20%, the average store card charges 30%. Some people are paying even more. This is starting to get more attention, but I don't think the hard cap will come into play. I really do think the best advice for cardholders is to take matters into your own hands. Don't wait for politicians or the Fed to come to your rescue.
That is excellent. I think that's great. I believe, I totally, as personally believe in financial independence and being independent, totally independent. I think, you're preaching to the choir here. Ted, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again on the program very soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place. Details, of course, at our website. And we're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.